Alchemy is an occult science preceding modern chemistry and physics that concerns itself with the manipulation of metals, elements, and the physical universe. It is considered to be an incredibly old branch of natural philosophy with roots as far back as Hellenistic Egypt, and was practiced in different forms around the world from ancient China to Renaissance Europe. However, Western alchemy remains its most well-known variation, and it has accrued a monstrous corpus of esoteric lore that draws from religion, mythology, and legends like nothing else in history. This iceberg will be about alchemy in both its Western and Eastern incarnations, as well as all of the various concepts that it has pulled from across the many hundreds, if not thousands of years, to become what we now know to be conventional science. Without further ado, let's get started with Layer 1, the surface. The Philosopher's Stone is a mythical substance that is commonly regarded as the entire endgame of alchemy as a discipline. Alchemists called it the tincture, and sought it out for its supposed ability to transform base metals into precious metals, which would obviously make anyone fabulously wealthy in a world without monetary inflation. However, the true power of the Philosopher's Stone goes far deeper than that. In the Renaissance age, alchemy was the exploration of the source code of the universe, and alchemists were concerned just as much with the perfection of the human soul as they were with chemistry. In fact, the gold transmutation was usually just an incentive for some occult-minded European noble to provide patronage to an alchemist as they did some truly esoteric research into the nature of reality. The Philosopher's Stone, in truth, was seen as a catalyst capable of taking anything to perfection, including the human body. It was the key to curing all diseases, finding eternal life, and even transcending the physical body itself. The earliest known written mention of the Philosopher's Stone is 300 AD, but the lore dates it back to the literal dawn of humanity. The alchemical text Gloria Mundi claims that Adam, the first man, acquired knowledge of the stone directly from God, and then passed this down through the line of prophets, which kind of retroactively explains why all these Bible figures were so absurdly long-lived. However, what makes the Philosopher's Stone interesting is the absolutely massive amount of complicated, contradictory, and sometimes deranged work that has been done to make it. We're talking about inventing new mathematics, devil worship, organ trading, and allegedly human sacrifice. The bizarre adventures that alchemists have taken to build the damn stone are what this iceberg is all about, and we'll explore these as we reach them. Isaac Newton was one of the greatest polymaths to ever exist across human history, known for inventing calculus, the laws of motion, and mathematically describing gravity. Born in 1642, he was a pioneering mathematician, physicist, philosopher, theologian, author, and also an alchemist. In fact, he himself considered his greatest achievements to be not anything to do with science, but instead with alchemy and the occult, which he felt were rediscovering the wisdom of the ancients. In fact, he believed that gravity was an emission of an alchemical substance called salniter, and in his writings made zero distinction between science and alchemy when they appear together. Like, he would go from talking about his optical experiments to stuff like Neptune's trident and Mercury's caduceus rod in the same page. However, Newton wasn't able to go public with his passion, due to the fact that the English Crown government feared an economic collapse if any scientists were to actually find a way to create infinite gold, and so punished unsanctioned alchemy by public hanging on a gold-plated scaffold, which honestly sounds a tad spiteful. After his death, several documents were published posthumously in which Newton went full mask off with his occult interests. In a text called The Chronology of Ancient Kingdoms Amended, he spent 87,000 words analyzing the sacred geometries of Hellenistic and biblical shrines like the Temple of Solomon, under the belief that they encoded secret information about the nature of God and reality. In 2016, a handwritten manuscript from Newton even showed up at an auction in Pasadena, California, titled Preparation of the Mercury for the Philosopher's Stone by the Antimonio Stellate Regulus of Mars and Luna, from the manuscripts of the American philosopher. Turns out, he was trying to improve on another alchemist's work using a new way to distill lead ore, but no secret of immortality just yet. Nicolas Flammel was a French scribe who, after his death, was believed to have been an alchemist who succeeded at creating the Philosopher's Stone and also having had achieved immortality along with his wife Perenelle Flammel. The two of them were known for their wealth and philanthropy later in life, which probably didn't help quiet speculation regarding their chosen method of alchemical wealth gathering. Flammel worked as a copyist, bookseller, and public writer who, amongst other librarian duties, lended his service to illiterate people who needed things recorded. According to the lore, he had a dream where an angel brought him a book containing what was described as a hidden secret straight from God, that he, was prophesied, would one day decipher. Flammel was disturbed by this dream, but as the years dragged on, the prophecy went unfulfilled. That was until he encountered a hobo who showed up at his shop with something to sell. Sure enough, the man pulled out a book that Flammel recognized immediately as the same one from his dream. The book in question was 21 pages long and split into 7 chapters, that Flammel, the moment he looked upon them, realized he couldn't at all understand. The book was complete gibberish and he didn't know what any of it even appeared to be. Now, here's where the lore gets a bit sketchy. The book was apparently full of symbols associated with Jewish mysticism, an ancient esoteric school of thought called the Kabbalah. The Kabbalah can be thought of as a metaphysical framework for alchemical ideas insofar as it explores the relation between God the Infinite and the finite material universe that he created. It probably needs its own iceberg, if I have to be perfectly honest. Anyway, Flammel went to the alchemists of Paris for assistance, but found none. Apparently, the local Jewish community wasn't really eager to share their esoteric knowledge with a Catholic, so he set off west. Flammel went with pilgrims to the tomb of St. James in Santiago de Compostela in northern Spain. There he met with an old Jew-turned-Christian called Conches, who was awed by the few extracts of the book that Flammel had managed to bring, and so decided to accompany Flammel back to Paris to translate the whole thing. However, before anything could be done, Conches died on the way there in Orleans. Despite this almost divinely ordained setback, Flammel started using what he'd already learned from Conches to start translating the work himself. Helped by Perronel, he took 21 years to decipher the 21 pages, and was allegedly left with a formula capable of producing the Philosopher's Stone and its direct application in the Elixir of Life. So this is the part of the story where Flammel gets fabulously rich and becomes a massive philanthropist throughout his later years. Then he fakes his funeral and disappears off the face of the earth. Now, where this gets a bit weird is that there is actually no empirical evidence that Flammel was involved in the natural or alchemical sciences. Zero. Flammel's life story is generally accepted as credible up until the hobo got involved. He was in fact a bookseller living a comfortable life in Paris. However, his wealth was easily sourced from 2 places. One was the fact that his wife Perronel came from an affluent family, with the accumulated wealth of 2 ex-husbands. And 2, that Flammel got lucky due to speculation on real estate trading. That's right, one of the biggest figures in alchemy was essentially a Wall Street bets ape of his time, which is, I guess, really topical, huh? The reason for this distortion was probably because later alchemists liked to legitimize their work by claiming that other scholars or wealthy men had actually found the stone, and Flammel was well known enough to be turned into a posthumous meme. And also he recently showed up in Assassin's Creed Unity and Harry Potter, so I guess people can't stop resurrecting the guy for money. The Oroboros is an ancient symbol depicting a dragon eating its own tail, originating as far back as the 14th century BC in an ancient Egyptian funerary text called the Enigmatic Book of the Netherworld, which was found in the tomb of Tutankhamun. Yeah, that pharaoh, the same one whose burial allegedly cursed the 20th century explorers who entered his tomb and pyramid. The Oroboros also shows up in a body of esoteric Greek texts called the Greek Magical Papyri, a collection of spells, incantations, formulae, and rituals dating as far back as the hundreds BCE. In alchemy, the Oroboros is both a sigil of power and a representation of change as a concept. It is a visualization of the idea that all matter is transmutationally equivalent, much like how lead and gold are really 2 sides of the same underlying object, and are therefore snapshots of an infinite cycle generated by the Philosopher's Stone. As a sigil, it is also used to represent the fusion of elemental sulfur and mercury, which was believed to form an esoteric compound that was foundational to the creation of the Philosopher's Stone. What's interesting is that other ancient cultures either independently developed or reappropriated the Oroboros. For example, the Norse had legends about a serpent long enough to encircle the world and bite its own tail. The Nicene and Ophite Gnostic schools also identified it with the serpent from the Garden of Eden. Rather than interpret the serpent as a hostile entity, they saw it instead as a heroic figure that led Adam and Eve to the first gnosis, meaning knowledge, obtained by eating the forbidden fruit of the tree of knowledge. That same Oroboros serpent was then identified as the guardian of a second tree, called the Tree of Life, which protected the secret of immortality. Alchemy is very much concerned with the pursuit of immortality, so it does make sense. What's important is that the Tree of Life is a conceptual framework for Gnostic and Jewish mysticism more than it is a literal tree, and so the Oroboros is seen to be more of a pedagogical key used to unlock the way. Honestly, anything to do with the trees and the Garden of Eden is a massive rabbit hole that goes really deep into alchemy, so we will for sure be seeing these concepts arise later down the iceberg. Black powder is the antiquated name for what we now know as gunpowder. More accurately, black powder is the historical antecedent of modern mass-produced gunpowder and was originally an alchemical extract rooted in Eastern Taoist esotericism. These Taoist alchemists were initially contracted by Emperor Wu Di of the Han Dynasty to crack the secret of eternal life. I guess everyone has the same priorities everywhere. These alchemists experimented by roasting sulfur and saltpeter and mixing them with charcoal, which resulted in the creation of what looked like a dark powdery substance that they called huoyao. Despite the fact that ingesting black powder wasn't exactly FDA compliant, the Taoists used it to treat skin diseases and fumigate insects even before it was used as a weapon, or even as fireworks. It was used also to create tattoos when ink wasn't available by pricking the skin and rubbing it into the open wound. Homunculus is Latin for little man, and is by definition a representation or caricature of a human being. Medical textbooks nowadays use a mildly horrifying graphic called a cortical homunculus as a representation of the human body based on the areas and proportions of the human brain devoted to certain limbs or organs. In 16th century alchemy, however, the homunculus describes an actual artificially spawned human being with roots in the ideas of creationism and divine perfection. The creation of a homunculus is often depicted as breaking a sort of heavenly taboo, or at the very least as the ill-fated consequence of mankind playing God by creating life in his own image, resulting in some sort of inhuman, cursed, or monstrous being. The legendary alchemist Paracelsus, who's in the top 5 most important figures in all of alchemy, described his method of creating homunculi as follows: that the sperm of a man be putrefied by itself in a sealed cucurbit for 40 days, with the highest degree of putrefaction in a horse's womb, or at least so long that it comes back to life and moves itself and stirs, which is easily observed. After this time, it will look somewhat like a man, but transparent without a body. If after this, it be fed wisely with the arcanum of human blood, and be nourished for up to 40 weeks, and be kept in the even heat of the horse's womb, a living human child grows therefrom, with all of its members like another child which is born of a woman, but much smaller. So yeah, it doesn't sound 100% legal, but you gotta excuse him. Homunculi are connected to the concepts of doppelgangers, or false humans, in earlier myths. And interestingly, an alchemical text called the Chemical Wedding of Christian Rosenkreutz seems to suggest that the ultimate goal of alchemy is not the transmutation of substances, but rather the artificial creation of humans and the usurping of God's own domain, which is pretty metal. An athanor is a type of furnace or oven used to provide uniform heat to facilitate a certain alchemical technique called alchemical digestion. Digestion is a process by which a substance is bottled and stored at a certain temperature over a very long period of time, up to several weeks. Now, traditionally, substances were digested under direct sunlight, or weirdly enough, in fresh horse manure. I guess the athanor was developed so alchemists didn't have to stick their hands in horse poo just to cook gunpowder or whatever. Athanors are made of 3 parts, generally speaking, which are stacked on top of one another. The lowest part is basically a grill used to hold coal to smolder at low temperatures. The middle part is then a holding vessel, usually made from terracotta and covered with openings by which substances can be inserted or extracted. The upper part is a pointed dome that prevents everything from either spoiling or cooling. Apparently, the athanor was derived from the design of an Arabic bread oven, which I guess it kind of resembles. Michael Mayer was an alchemist of the late German Renaissance who was known for his involvement with and defense of an esoteric order called the Rosicrucian Brotherhood. Like the Rosicrucians, Mayer dedicated his life to the quest for the Philosopher's Stone. Mayer was a student of a new alchemical strategy whose pursuit of the stone involved supernatural forces that would express themselves through chemical medicines, a field that was very much the occult precursor to modern-day metallurgy and pharmaceuticals. This, however, created a problem. Mayer was Lutheran and wasn't supposed to have contact with anything supernatural outside of the church. However, the Rosicrucians he was entangled with were not only alchemists, but advertised themselves to be straight-up wizards. Like, they would practice rites of summoning where they would call down angels and nature spirits as part of their research. Part of me wonders why they didn't just take over the country with their horde of celestial super beings, but I guess Gandalf couldn't just fly the hobbits to Mordor, right? So Mayer was basically threading the needle his entire life between doing his research and being declared a heretic and stoned. Despite all of this, the European royalty and nobility were willing to pay massive amounts of money to learn the secrets of alchemy, magic, and astrology, which conveniently for the alchemists who sold these services, could only be passed on orally or written down in private manuscripts. So that was how Mayer found his employment as the personal physician of Emperor Rudolf II, who was known for being obsessed with the occult, as well as sponsoring a private armada of magicians in the quest for something called Pansophia, which was a grand unified theory of all human knowledge. The guy was running what was essentially a magical university in his basement, which is pretty wild. Interestingly, Mayer was also known for his work in the somewhat controversial literary genre of Hermetic mythology, which essentially treated older Egyptian, Greek, and Latin myths as being part of a massive ARG, with repositories of alchemical secrets and lore coded into the allegorical narratives of legendary poems to be uncovered by later generations. He is best known for writing the perennial text Atalanto-Fugians in 1618, which is sort of like a picture book that compiled Greek myths alongside alchemical commentary. Later, he wrote a text called the Arcana Arcanissima in 1614, which was divided into 6 books that really went on a deep dive, from linking alchemical theory to the genealogy of Greek gods, to interpreting the Iliad and Odyssey as representing alchemical processes, to straight up looking for medicinal knowledge in the labors of Hercules. Mayer's entire bibliography is actually quite extensive, and the idea of heroic epics describing the search for the Philosopher's Stone is a theme that comes up a lot later on. Or if you're cynical, you could say that a good way for an alchemist to secure funding from a noble is by legitimizing their work using stories that noble probably read earlier in their life. That was part 1 of the Alchemy Iceberg. I hope you guys found this at least somewhat entertaining, and if you're interested, part 2 will be coming soon. This is an absolutely massive iceberg, and it goes down pretty far, so I hope you're prepared. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you soon.